At the heart of every legendary rivalry is a story that grabs your attention and refuses to let go. Rivalries in the UFC are fueled by personal conflict, competitive balance, and the kind of drama that makes you feel like you're part of something bigger than just a fight night. But what makes a rivalry truly legendary, and why do some stick with us long after the final bell? A lot of these feuds start with something small, a stray comment at a press event, a bit of arrogance after a win, or a disagreement during a media tour. But in the UFC, little sparks don't stay small for long. Trash talk escalates, egos clash, and the tension spills out of interviews and social media right into the octagon. One of the clearest examples is Jon Jones versus Daniel Cormier. Their rivalry began building in late 2014, but exploded in front of the world at a UFC 182 media event shortly after. What started as a face-off quickly turned into a physical brawl, with security and staff struggling to pull them apart. It wasn't intended to be a publicity stunt. It was real animosity on display, and fans could feel it. Their first fight took place in January 2015 at UFC 182, where Jones defended his title by decision. The bad blood didn't fade after the fight. 2 years later, they met again at UFC 214 in July 2017. Jones won by knockout, but the result was later overturned due to a failed drug test. Thereafter, the trash talk, emotional interviews, and public arguments continued to fuel the rivalry. It's this mix of personal animosity and competitive equality that makes a rivalry legendary. When both fighters are at the top of their game, fans know anything can happen, and that sense of uncertainty keeps people glued to every round. Another key ingredient is the story that unveils a path to the future. Rivalries like Ronda Rousey versus Miesha Tate show how personal narratives can change the sport itself. Their feud was about more than winning a fight. It was about breaking new ground for women in MMA. Rousey's confidence and dominance clashed with Tate's determination and grit. Their interactions on The Ultimate Fighter in press conferences and during interviews added layers to the rivalry. Even though Rousey won both of their UFC fights, the drama between them made every encounter must-see key TV and pushed women's MMA into the spotlight. The UFC has mastered the ability to amplify these stories. Face-offs, press conferences, and social media exchanges are all designed to keep the tension high. The build-up to Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor at UFC 229 is a perfect example. Their verbal sparring turned personal, touching on family, culture, and pride. The anticipation was so intense that the fight broke every UFC pay-per-view record, showing just how powerful a well-built rivalry can be. Rivalries also adapt to the times. As the sport grows, so do the stories. The feud between Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz, for example, was short but explosive. Their two fights were packed with trash talk, unexpected outcomes, and moments that instantly became part of UFC lore. Diaz's upset win in their first bout and McGregor's revenge in the rematch gave fans a storyline that was as compelling outside the cage as it was inside. But to truly understand how the sport got its identity, you have to look back at the earliest days, when one feud set the tone for everything that followed. Royce Gracie versus Ken Shamrock. The event itself was unlike anything the fight world had seen. No weight classes, no time limits, and a single-night tournament meant to answer the old question of which martial art truly reigned supreme. Gracie, representing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, looked nothing like the bruisers fans expected to dominate. He was slender, quiet, and moved with an almost surgical calm. Ken Shamrock, on the other hand, was a powerhouse. A wrestler and submission specialist from Pankrise in Japan, built like someone out of a comic book. It was none other than UFC's inaugural event at UFC 1. Their fight became the moment that changed everything. Most expected Shamrock's strength and wrestling background to be too much for Gracie's unfamiliar style. Instead, Gracie pulled Shamrock into his guard, worked methodically, and locked in a GI choke, forcing Shamrock to tap out in just under a minute. This was far more impactful than a win for Gracie. The effectiveness of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was on full display for the world, and suddenly, every fighter and coach realized that ground technique wasn't just a niche, it was essential. Fans saw that size and strength alone weren't enough. Shamrock, who had been considered a favorite, was left stunned. For him, the loss left him questioning everything he thought he knew about fighting. Their paths would cross again at UFC 5 in 1995. By then, the UFC had grown in notoriety and controversy. The promotion leaned into its raw, unpredictable format, drawing in both devoted fans and critics who called for its ban. This time, the anticipation was even higher. Gracie was still undefeated, and Shamrock had spent the intervening years learning submissions and refining his strategy. The rematch wasn't just about revenge, it was about proving which approach could truly dominate in a sport that was still defining itself. Unlike their first meeting, the second fight was a grueling, drawn-out affair. The two battled for 30 minutes, with neither able to secure a decisive advantage. The bout pushed into a 5-minute overtime, but still neither fighter could break through. The match ended in a draw, a result that disappointed fans hoping for a dramatic finish, but marked a turning point for the sport. The spectacle of their first fight had given way to a strategic chess match, showing how quickly fighters were evolving. Shamrock's newfound submission defense and Gracie's relentless ground game demonstrated that the UFC was no longer just about raw power or one-dimensional skills. Adaptation was now the key to survival. These two fights, one explosive and brief, the other long and tactical, showed what the UFC was all about in its early years. Gracie's quick submission in their first encounter forced everyone to rethink what worked in real combat. Shamrock's ability to last the distance in their second meeting proved that learning and adapting new techniques was necessary to stay competitive. The rivalry itself became the UFC's best advertisement. Anyone could win, any style could rise or fall, and no one was safe if they refused to evolve. Beyond the action in the cage, Gracie versus Shamrock represented something bigger. The UFC was originally pitched as a proving ground for martial arts, almost like a live experiment. Could a jiu-jitsu specialist beat a wrestler? Could a smaller technical fighter overcome sheer strength? The answers played out in real time, and fans got to witness the evolution of combat sports from the inside. Gracie's victories changed the way people trained, fought, and thought about martial arts. Suddenly, gyms everywhere were adding jiu-jitsu classes, and fighters who once relied only on power or striking started learning submissions and escapes. Shamrock, too, became a crucial part of the UFC story. With his willingness to master new techniques, he demonstrated that the real secret to success was versatility. The Gracie-Shamrock rivalry gave the UFC promotion its first real identity, but as influential as it was, it couldn't guarantee the UFC's survival. The UFC needed more than just a great rivalry. It needed a moment that would capture the world's attention and bring new fans into the fold. That moment arrived years later, when a single fight delivered the spark the UFC desperately needed. In 2005, the UFC faced a crossroads. Attendance was down, pay-per-view numbers were dropping, and the organization's future looked bleak. The UFC needed a breakthrough, and it arrived on April 9, 2005, when Griffin and Bonnar headlined the Ultimate Fighter finale. From the opening bell, Griffin and Bonnar set a pace that was almost impossible to keep. They met in the center of the octagon and never let up. Griffin's shin quickly turned swollen and purple from repeated kicks, while Bonnar answered with relentless body blows and sharp jabs. Each exchange was more intense than the last, with both men refusing to give ground. The fight was a 3-round war, and the crowd at the Cox Pavilion in Las Vegas responded with a level of energy rarely seen at UFC events up to that point. Both fighters absorbed heavy punishment, but neither broke. Griffin's battered leg and Bonnar's bruised ribs became symbols of the grit and determination that defined the fight. By the end of the second round, both men were exhausted, bloodied, and running on pure willpower. Still, they pressed forward, trading blows and pushing the pace as if everything depended on it, because for the UFC, it did. As the third round began, the intensity only increased. Griffin and Bonnar continued to throw everything they had at each other. The action was so compelling that fans watching on Spike TV couldn't look away. The fight's raw drama helped spark a 32% spike in the network's ratings that night, a surge that would prove vital for the UFC's future. Word spread quickly. Viewers started calling friends, urging them to tune in and witness what was happening live. For many, this was their first real look at MMA, and the fight delivered a showcase of heart and skill that no one could ignore. When the final bell sounded, the crowd erupted. The judges awarded the win to Griffin, but the impact went far beyond the scorecards. Dana White, recognizing the significance of what he just witnessed, offered Bonnar a UFC contract on the spot. The fight's aftermath brought immediate and lasting change. Griffin and Bonnar were both hailed as heroes, and the bout itself was quickly labeled as one of the greatest in MMA history. Dana White has called Griffin versus Bonnar the most important fight in UFC history, and it's easy to see why. The fight became a blueprint for what MMA could offer. Not just violence, but stories, personalities, and moments that connect with fans on a deeper level. This fight saved the UFC, but it also set the stage for even bigger moments. As the sport grew, so did the rivalries. And soon, the UFC would see personal animosity spill over in ways that changed everything, both inside and outside the cage. The clash between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Conor McGregor at UFC 229 is a clear example of a massive collision of personalities, cultures, and fan bases that turned into the most watched event in UFC history. According to UFC's 2024 records, UFC 229 drew 2.4 million pay-per-view buys, setting a new benchmark for the sport. The origins of this feud go back to a personal dispute that exploded during UFC 223 Fight Week in April 2018 at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. It started with Khabib's team confronting and slapping Artem Lobov, a close friend of McGregor's. In response, McGregor and a large group of his associates flew to New York and targeted a bus carrying Khabib and several other fighters. McGregor threw a dolly through a window, injuring fighters inside and causing chaos backstage. This was no publicity stunt. The attack led to McGregor's arrest and made headlines around the world. The incident set a tone of real animosity, turning what could have been a standard rivalry into something far more personal and unpredictable. Once the fight was officially announced, anticipation skyrocketed. The build-up was intense, with McGregor unleashing a steady stream of trash talk. He didn't just go after Khabib's fighting skills. He targeted Khabib's family, religion, and home country, crossing lines that most fighters avoid. McGregor's words were designed to provoke, but Khabib refused to respond in kind. Instead, he kept his focus on the fight, letting his actions speak for him. The press conferences were tense, with McGregor trying to get under Khabib's skin and Khabib staying mostly silent, creating a sense of suspense about how things would play out in the octagon. The fight at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas felt bigger than any title bout before it. The arena was packed and the atmosphere was charged. For McGregor, this was a chance to reclaim his lightweight belt after a long absence from MMA. For Khabib, it was about defending his title and his reputation in the face of relentless insults. Fans from around the world tuned in, each side hoping their fighter would come out on top. From the opening bell, Khabib set the tone. He pressed forward, using his wrestling to control McGregor's movements. Khabib landed over 70% of his takedown attempts, according to event statistics, and kept McGregor pinned to the mat for long stretches. In the second round, Khabib not only maintained top control, but also landed heavy ground and pound, taunting McGregor with the now famous line, "Let's talk now." This was a direct response to McGregor's pre-fight trash talk, showing that Khabib was in control both physically and mentally. McGregor managed a brief rally in the third round, landing some strikes and stuffing a few takedowns, but he couldn't turn the tide. By the fourth round, Khabib had worn him down. He secured a neck crank submission, forcing McGregor to tap out. The fight was a clear demonstration of Khabib's dominance and composure under pressure. But the real chaos began after the fight ended. Instead of celebrating in the cage, Khabib leapt over the fence and charged at Dylan Dennis, one of McGregor's cornermen, sparking a brawl that spilled into the crowd. Meanwhile, members of Khabib's team entered the octagon and confronted McGregor, leading to more punches being thrown. Security rushed in to break up the fighting, but the damage was done. The post-fight melee became just as memorable as the bout itself, dominating headlines and sparking debate about the limits of rivalry in combat sports. The fallout was immediate. The Nevada State Athletic Commission launched an investigation, withholding Khabib's fight purse and issuing suspensions and fines to both fighters. Khabib later apologized for his actions, but pointed directly to McGregor's personal attacks as the reason for his outburst. Despite the controversy, or maybe because of it, UFC 229's impact was undeniable. The event's 2.4 million pay-per-view buys set a record that still stands, showing just how much personal animosity can drive interest in a fight. This rivalry changed the UFC in several ways. For Khabib, the win solidified his legacy as one of the sport's most dominant champions. He remained undefeated and proved that his wrestling and mental toughness could withstand even the most intense psychological warfare. For McGregor, the loss was a turning point. While he remained a huge star, the defeat forced him to rethink his approach, both inside and outside the cage. The fight also showed the risks and rewards of personal rivalries. They can draw massive audiences, but they can also lead to chaos that overshadows the sport itself. While some rivalries like Khabib and McGregor begin with a mutual hatred, others have been born by close friends turned bitter enemies. Sometimes, the most intense grudges start when close relationships fall apart. One of the most striking examples of a friendship turned rivalry in the UFC is the story of Colby Covington and Jorge Masvidal. These two weren't just teammates, they were roommates. Covington, a standout collegiate wrestler, and Masvidal, a respected striker, complemented each other in the gym. Masvidal took Covington under his wing, helping him adapt to the world of MMA, while Covington introduced Masvidal to new wrestling techniques. Their bond was so strong in those early years that ATT owner Dan Lambert once joked he thought they were in a relationship because of how inseparable they were. But that tight-knit friendship unraveled in a very public way. The split started with a financial dispute over an unpaid $12,500 coaching fee for coach Jeremy Federer. Masvidal said Covington refused to pay, so Masvidal personally covered the bill. More important than the money, this was about respect and loyalty. According to Masvidal, Covington's failure to pay was a line crossed, and it left a mark that couldn't be ignored. Around the same time, Covington began building his controversial persona, ramping up the trash talk and targeting not just rivals, but also teammates. This shift didn't sit well with many at American Top Team, especially Masvidal, who felt that Covington's new attitude was disrespectful and damaging to the gym's culture. The tension between them grew as Covington's public comments became more inflammatory. Masvidal openly criticized Covington's behavior, calling him out for being fake and only interested in fame. Covington, in turn, accused Masvidal of riding his coattails and being jealous of his success. The feud spilled out of the gym and into the media, with both fighters trading increasingly personal insults. Masvidal summed up his feelings in an ESPN interview, saying simply, "He's a coward." Things hit a breaking point in 2019. The two nearly came to blows in the American Top Team gym, with Masvidal recalling Covington shouting, "I'll fly and kill you, bro. Don't ever talk to me like that." After this confrontation, both were eventually forced out of the gym, unable to coexist in the same training environment. What started as a disagreement over money and respect escalated into a full-blown grudge played out in interviews, on social media, and in press conferences. Covington's trash talk grew even more pointed, at times dragging Masvidal's family into the feud. Masvidal, for his part, didn't hold back either, calling Covington a fake and making it clear that the friendship was beyond repair. Years of animosity finally led to a fight that fans had been waiting for. On March 5th, 2022, Covington and Masvidal faced off at UFC 272 in Las Vegas. There was no championship belt on the line, but the stakes felt even higher. The build-up to the fight was intense, with both men using every opportunity to air their grievances. As UFC fighter Kayla Harrison put it, they're going to be coming to kill each other. Inside the T-Mobile Arena, the tension was palpable. From the start, Covington leaned on his wrestling, applying constant pressure and controlling Masvidal on the ground. Masvidal, true to form, looked for openings with his striking, landing clean shots when he could. But Covington's relentless pace and grappling made the difference. Over the course of 5 rounds, 30 minutes of cage time, Covington executed his game plan, wearing Masvidal down and neutralizing his offense. The judges all agreed, awarding Covington a unanimous decision victory. Covington called it the most satisfying victory of his career, feeling it represented closure in a feud that had defined years of his life. For Masvidal, the loss was bitter. He criticized Covington's style, calling it boring, and made it clear that the bad blood was far from settled. Even after the final bell, the animosity lingered, with both fighters continuing to trade verbal shots in interviews and online. What made the Covington versus Masvidal rivalry so compelling was the depth of their shared history. The emotional stakes made the bout resonate with fans in a way that few matchups do. Without the backstory, it was just another fight card main event. But knowing what was at stake, the audience was drawn in by the real-life drama behind the action. The UFC has shown time and again that it's not just the fights themselves that matter, but the narratives that surround them. Looking ahead, the question now is which new rivalries will capture the imagination of fans and carry the UFC into its next era. Rivalries are the engine that keeps the UFC moving forward, and the landscape is changing as new fighters step into the spotlight. The future of UFC rivalries will be shaped by how well these stories grab fans' attention, with narratives that feel authentic and personal. Take Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira as an example. Their story began in the world of kickboxing, where Pereira handed Adesanya 2 losses, including a highlight reel knockout with a left hook to the jaw. When Pereira entered the UFC, fans immediately started talking about a potential MMA clash. That anticipation paid off at UFC 281 in October 2022, when Pereira knocked out Adesanya to claim the middleweight title. Thereafter, at UFC 287, Adesanya got his revenge, knocking out Pereira and reclaiming the belt. With the UFC series now standing at 1-1, the rivalry has become one of the most closely followed in MMA. The personal history and the back-and-forth results keep fans invested, and there's always speculation about whether they'll meet again. Another rivalry that's shaping the UFC's future is the ongoing tension between Sean O'Malley and Aljamain Sterling. Their feud is a mix of generational differences and personal criticism. Sterling openly questioned O'Malley's quick rise and criticized his focus outside the cage, which set the stage for their title fight. In August 2023, O'Malley answered those doubts with a decisive win, taking the bantamweight belt from Sterling. Since then, Sterling has continued to push for a rematch, using interviews and social media to keep the tension alive. O'Malley, meanwhile, leans into his unique style and direct fan engagement, making every interaction part of the story. Their rivalry shows how personalities and public personas can shape a rivalry. Leon Edwards and Jorge Masvidal's unresolved grudge is another example of how a single moment can spark years of anticipation. Their history dates back to a backstage altercation in 2019, when Masvidal delivered his now famous three-piece with a soda combination after a heated exchange. That incident went viral and instantly became part of UFC lore. Since then, fans have been waiting for the bad blood to be settled in the cage. Modern rivalries are also evolving thanks to the way fighters and the UFC use social media and promotional tactics. Fighters now have direct access to fans, and a single post can escalate a feud or keep it in the headlines. For example, Khabib Nurmagomedov's non-alcohol promo shots directed at Conor McGregor before their fight at UFC 229 added another layer to their already heated rivalry, drawing in fans who followed every move online. Promotional events like face-offs and press conferences are still important, but they're now just one part of a larger strategy to keep rivalries in the public eye. Looking at where the UFC is headed, it's clear that rivalries will remain at the center of the sport's story, whether they start with a viral moment backstage, a string of social media posts, or a dramatic title fight. These feuds are what keep fans coming back. As new fighters rise and old grudges resurface, the UFC's future will be shaped by the rivalries that capture the imagination of fans and push the sport to new heights. The names' faces may change, but the formula, personal tension, elite competition, and compelling narratives, remains the same. If you like what you saw, hit us with a like and subscribe, and join us as we unpack more across the world of the UFC.